Um, so we're going to go ahead and jump in. Earlier today, we talked about A New Way, this book that talks about how to bring learning communities into college campuses. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the surprise related to this book later on. And then my second session, we talked about looking at case studies of success and what pitfalls to avoid when we're implementing faculty learning communities. And now we're going to talk about focusing the work on faculty learning communities on our campuses and how we can, make sure that we're developing shared understanding of what we want to assess and things of that nature, while also maintaining academic freedom and autonomy. So let's go ahead and dive in. Ileana, I love that background. That's pretty. Welcome. So my name is Sudie Whalen. I'm with American Institutes for Research. I'm a TA consultant. I forgot to let Kirsten do her introduction thing. Kirsten, I'm sorry. Kirsten.
Don't be. You got it. You did it.
I just jumped in and started talking. I'm sorry.
No. It's totally fine. I was going to say all the things that that you were going to say, other than just like the Zoom meeting protocols. But it looks like folks came in, muted themselves, and you have total control of muting and unmuting, and we look forward to this session.
Thank you, Chris. I'm sorry. So
no, don't even worry about it.
So yeah, like she said, you make sure you're muted, you all are, when you're not talking, but I do encourage conversation. So if at any time you have questions or anything like that, please feel free to unmute and speak, join us in the chat, anything like that. I like discussion, I like open conversation, I like collaboration. So feel free to jump in. And even if you have little jokes, Alan, you can put those in the chat too. Alrighty, so I'm Sudie Whalen with American Institutes for Research. I came to American Institutes for Research to focus primarily on learning communities, but I also do a lot of other things. My background is in career technical education. I do a lot with collaborative team building, integrated education and training, adult learning theory, andragogy, and things of that nature. But my passion is collaborative teams because I have seen the difference it makes on school campuses and the difference it makes for student outcomes when teachers collaborate with my own eyes. And so I love it. I like sharing that, and teachers collaborating is just fun. So I just like to do that. It can be frustrating and overwhelming at times. I'm not going to lie to you, but it can also be a lot of fun. So let's talk about this. If you've ever been to one of my webinars and one of my sessions, you've probably seen this quote before, but it's one of my favorites. This comes from a study. There's plenty of data on effectiveness of collaborative teams in education. It's all over the place, whether we're talking about K-12, community colleges, four-year colleges. But the findings that we're seeing here are based on a 2019 analysis of a bunch of German programs. They started the analysis in 2012, released the results in 2019. You know how data goes. You collect it one year, we see it a few years later. 81 participating countries, including the US, submitted data, all of which contributed research and studies to the findings. The tests focused on student abilities to basically apply what is learned in the class in real world situations and environments, and included math, science, reading, collaborative problem solving, financial literacy, and so much more. What they found was that a positive effect on student achievement can be established only when teachers specifically collaborate to discuss or advise each other on student performance. That's not to say that there's no way that students can improve, but what they found, not I'm saying we, like I was part of it, I wasn't. What they found though was that consistently they saw major systemic change in overall growth and overall outcomes for all students consistently across the board when teachers were collaborating. So what that means is if I, Sudie, decide I want to influence change and make things better in my classroom, my students will do better, but your students won't change, right? But if we all come together and we collaborate, we decide we're going to make these changes and we're going to make all these adjustments so all of our students do better, all of our students do better, which causes the whole institution as a whole to do better. So that's just a little tidbit. I love that particular study, but there's a lot of studies, case studies, and things like that on faculty learning communities and community colleges, four-year universities. And then there's a ton of information on PLCs in K-12 because K-12 gets all the attention. But anyway, moving on. So our focus today is going to be a brief overview and what a faculty learning community is. If you're with me earlier today, this is going to feel like a recap. I'm sorry. I just don't like to leave people behind. Then we're going to talk about types of assessments and which assessments improvements faculty learning communities really focus on. And then we're going to talk about the reason we're here, lesson charrettes, how to conduct them, and where to go to find more resources about them. And I'm going to share some links and things like that with you that you can bookmark and save for future reference in case you want to go back to them. I love readily available resources when you don't have to recreate the wheel and something is already there for you. It is great, but that doesn't mean just because you pick it that everybody's going to agree. So it's always nice to have some collaboration in there. And I also have a surprise at the end of the session, and we'll get to that. Those of you who know what the surprise is, no talking, okay? I know who knows. All right, so our brief overview in faculty learning communities. So Yarrick and I talk a lot. We've been working together with SLO stuff for a few years. AIR has supported the SLO symposium for a few years as well. And one of the things that he and I were talking about last year and again this year was just the difficulty with hitting that fourth pillar. When we talk about guided pathways, it's not hard to find data that tells us whether or not we're creating clear curricular pathways. It's not that hard to find data that tells us whether or not students are getting onto those pathways or whether or not they're staying on the path. We can see those persistence reports. The problem that we have a hard time with is ensuring that learning is happening with intentional outcomes. Because a lot of times we have those older SLOs that have been around for a long time that got grandfathered in, and we're just like, well, these still look fine. Let's just keep it this way. And we're not really looking closely enough to see, is this SLO connected to a specific outcome that I can assess my students on, right? And so that's the thing. Like if we're setting an SLO, we need to be able to assess, are they hitting that SLO? Are they getting that point? Are they getting the points? And once they get it, can they apply what they've learned so that when they graduate, we are guaranteed that every student who went through this particular course knows exactly this specific content, skill, material, whatever it may be, right? So this is why David gave me I know what college you went to, David. So this is why we're all connecting and talking about SLOs and how we can be more consistent and how we can collaborate together to assure that if I'm teaching the same class Kyle is teaching, that both of our students are coming out and we're sure that they received an equitable education. We're sure both of those sets of students came out with the same quality of education and nobody was left behind, right? And I'm not trying to pick on Kyle. Kyle's awesome. I don't know if you can tell, just by the picture you can tell. Okay, so let's talk about what does the SLO, not the SLO, but what does the FLC do in terms of continuous improvement? So when we talk about faculty learning communities, we're not just talking about you get together and you meet once a month and you don't do a whole lot and you talk a little bit and you discuss your problems, you complain from here and there, and then you're done, right? That's not exactly what we do. Instead, what we do is implement a continuous improvement cycle, one in which we begin by collaboratively analyzing data. We specifically look for where are the gaps in our data and where are the areas of strength. And that's our second step. We identify the areas of strength once we've analyzed our data, and then we our future focus. So once I'm looking at my data, I can see and I'm saying, okay, we can tell that students are doing really great in this area, but this area looks like it needs some work. And so that's going to be my specific area for future focus. Then I'm going to establish some goals. I'm going to establish a long-term goal, and I'm also going to establish short-term goals to help me meet that long-term goal. But I'm not doing that by myself. I'm doing it with my team, and I don't get to pick it by myself. I get to collaborate with my team, and my team and I agree. We don't want to make it such a situation in which one person is saying, this is the gap I identified, this is the goal, and this is what we're going to do, because then people feel voluntold to do things and they're not motivated and they don't buy in, right? Hi, Karen, I just saw you joined us. Next, we participate in collective inquiry, which is seeking out best practices, whether that's assessment, whether that's, how we're teaching and deciding on what we want to do, whether that is identifying curriculum, so many different things that we can talk about in the best practice category. Next, we establish tasks, activities, responsibilities, timelines, and resources needed. Now, we have to communicate with leadership, and of course, leadership will be communicating with us through this process, right? But we need to involve them at this step, because if we need resources, that means we need what? Money. And who controls the money? Probably not the faculty. So that's where we need to go back and say, this is what we identified as the gap. This is what our goal is and what we'd like to do. These are the resources we need. At which point leadership can say, yes, you can go ahead and move forward. The funding is available, or no, it is not. But it's really important for leadership to communicate this information there. Ileana said, totally agree. Herding faculty is like herding cats. Letting people self-define those goals is so critical. Yes, professional cat herders are what SLO SLO coordinators kind of are a little bit, right? Because you're trying to get everybody together to agree on what these are. And so, and I actually kind of challenge SLO coordinators to kind of think of yourself as professional cat herder slash faculty learning community facilitator. So so while you're doing that, you're also asking questions, you're bringing the group together, you're the one helping them to move along. When something gets stuck, then you're the one identifying those things and helping to move them along. Ultimately, we want to be able to turn the faculty learning community over to them and let them completely do everything with it. But to get it started, you may have to facilitate up front. Thank you, Ileana, for that for that point. We also then implement, process, carry out action research. This is basically an ongoing action research project where we're always looking at data, we're always looking at assessments, and then we're going back and implementing change. And then we look at how did that go? What were the results of that? And then we make adjustments based on those results. The central focus of all of this is always going to be student learning, improvements to student learning. And that last piece is, of course, monitoring results and then repeat the process. It's not a one and done. Even if you do it one time and you see that positive change and everything goes great, guess what that means? It's time to move on to something else, right? And we do it all over again. So let's get a little further into what faculty communities are and what they are not. So a faculty learning community is a specifically structured learning community of faculty and staff in higher education that includes the goal of building community, engaging in scholarly practice, and developing the scholarship of teaching and learning. That's what faculty learning communities are. What they are not is a prescriptive method of teaching that removes faculty autonomy and academic freedom. The goal is not to take away your ability to choose. The goal is not to take away your knowledge and your expertise. That's why you're educators. But it's instead to offer a peer-reviewed opportunity for us to assure that everybody is doing great. So if I'm a great teacher, Alan's a great teacher, Tony's a great teacher, everybody on this call is a great teacher, but we're all working in silos, we don't get the opportunity to learn from one another or build each other up. But when we come together as a community, then you see things that I may have missed, or I might see something you may have missed, or you can give me suggestions on how I can do better. And I'm receptive to those suggestions because we've taken the time to team build and get to know each other and become a community. And that's an important thing. I put that in there on purpose. Don't forget to team build, to get to know each other. Team building is literally trust building. If people don't trust each other, they're not going to trust that you care about their students as much as they do. They're not going to feel comfortable sharing their data with you. They're going to be defensive. So you want to definitely take the time to let educators get to know one another. Let them take some time to break bread, have video calls, do the silly things that people do to get to know one another. I don't care if it's a trivia night where we're talking about all the topics that are included in our courses, but we're just being silly. Just have fun together, but team build and trust build so that there's not barriers and walls built up around the faculty. So some benefits. According to Washington State Board of Community and Technical Colleges, faculty learning communities have many benefits included, but of course not limited to. Faculty learning communities stimulate innovation while simultaneously creating experiential and collaborative learning environments. These learning communities also provide a flexible professional development structure that supports learning around any number of topics specific to instruction and assessment, including technology integration, cultural competence, and importantly, the scholarship of teaching and learning, which is necessary to keep faculty up to date with the ever-evolving and always changing field of higher education. And so when we think about these things, I really want you to think about the fact that when it comes to faculty learning communities, our job as a learning community is not to come together and complain about all the things we hate the dean did last week, or to complain about the policies in the memo that came out the week before that. Our job is to focus solely on instruction, assessment, and student learning. That's the focus. It's really easy when we come together as a team to like have our little gripe session and be like, oh my gosh, the weather's been horrible. My hair is frizzy, so I got stuck wearing this thing. And then did you see the email? I got the email. Like, how many times have you guys had meetings that started out that way, right? So instead, we want to bring people together and have them communicate and talk about student learning. What are your students struggling with? This is what I'm having a hard time with this week. I thought I did a great job with that lesson, but then when we assessed it, everybody bombed it except for 2 people. So what do I need to focus on? So it's not that we're never complaining about anything. It's just that our complaints are very specific to what's going on with our student learning, and we're asking for help and guidance on how to do better. The other piece there is that we're very focused, and this is kind of the nerd in me loves this, but we're very focused on data and results, and the heart and soul of how we know if we're doing well or not is based on data. It's not assumptions, it's not hunches, it's not because I know my students and I can tell they're learning because they were nodding and smiling when I was teaching. No, it's a matter of I looked at the data and the data tells me that we have a gap here, or the data tells me they really got that information, we're doing really good. So, you know, even if we're doing really great things, we still want to look for where can we improve. Ileana said she's hearing we should have focused complaints. Yeah, sure, okay. so yeah, I mean, so there's going to be times when you're going to be concerned, where you're going to say, I'm struggling with this, and that is okay. The goal is to have a team which has built up trust in each other, that we can come together and talk about what we're struggling with and we can do better. So yeah, if we want to call that focused complaints, let's call that focused complaints. So when it comes to faculty learning communities and what they collaborate on, there are 4 essential questions that they focus on. What are the essential knowledge, skills, and concepts and skills that we want our students to be able to demonstrate at each major and each course, right? So specifically, what do we want our students to learn? How will we know if students are learning? How do we know that they've learned it, right? How will we provide additional time and support to students who experience difficulty? What do we do if they don't learn it, right? And lastly, how can we extend learning of students who demonstrate proficiency, right? What do we do when they already know it? Those are the focuses. And our SLOs should help us with meeting those things. Our SLOs should answer question number 1. What do I want my students to learn, right? And so once we've identified that, the next step is to say, okay, what data do I need to confirm that the students learned that? And that is where the assessments come in. So this is probably not new information to you. You guys like been teaching for 5,000 years, but I include this anyway. Collectively, of course, there's no one on the call that's 5,000 years old. So what type of assessments do you currently use, and how do you choose them? And you can unmute and speak if you'd like. I like collaborative conversation, or you can answer in the chat. What kind of assessments do you currently use, and how do you choose them? I see you unmuted, Carol. Go ahead.
Yes, so Sudie, in the organizations that I've worked with, of course, we have summative, assessments at the end of the year based on grants or whatever is required, by the state, California Department of Ed. But we also encourage and expect our teachers to do formative assessments so that they can evaluate student learning on a day-by-day basis. And that's one of the hardest things to do because it's very time consuming. But when you work together, then you can start working on those common outcomes for students and make sure that you're assessing, your content with rigor.
Absolutely. Thank you, Carol. Ileana, I saw that you had unmuted a moment ago. Do you want to share? And please tell me if I'm mispronouncing your name.
No, you got it right. So, yeah, so I teach English. So a lot of essays, and then there's a required midterm and final timed essay exam, which I don't agree with, but whatever. I mean, it's part of the SLOs, right? But something that I've been really working on is really project-based assessments. So rather than just the classic essay, really having multiple steps, multiple phases, and reimagining what that essay looks like, and incorporating more practical sort of technological multimedia skills into that. For example, writing a script, me evaluating the writing for that script rhetorically, and then seeing them turn that into a video, for instance, or like a presentation, this one. So there's sort of that overlap.
Thank you for sharing. I love that. And that's actually real world practice, right? Like I've produced video series for a links project. And part of that is you have to script, you have to evaluate the script, you have to edit the script, you have to get approval of said script before you can even do anything else, right? And so that's a really practical way of doing that. And I also like that we're thinking of things besides just paper and pencil essays and things like that, but we're also thinking about problem and project-based learning. That's very cool. I'm going to go into the chat and look at what we have in here. Janie said for academic transfer classes, papers and exams mostly, for a CTE class, performance-based exams to test for competency recognized by the profession. I'm thinking of swapping out my traditional final exam for a take-home, asking students to find one discussion post they write in the class to map to each SLO, and then reflect on what more they know about the SLO now, or add to what they wrote before. That's beautiful. I like that. Thank you so much for sharing, Janie. So yeah, when we think about our assessments, we often have, you know, some various types of summative and formative assessments, right? We have our assessments focus on the choice of the, sorry, let me start the slide over because I just completely lost my train of thought. So when we're talking about faculty learning communities, our assessments are the primary focus there. We look for the data, but where do we get that data? Assessments, right? And so if we don't have good data, then that means we're not assessing well enough to identify if they're hitting that outcome, right? And so the assessment data and those assessments are one of the main focuses here. And so they can be summative or formative. So we're talking about the final exams, midterms, unit, lesson, and chapter tests, right? But then also the formative assessments, which are the assessments for learning, right? Our classroom assignments and activities, homework assignments and activities. So our faculty learning community will look at both, but the bulk of your work will be based around those formative assessments, because we don't want to wait until the end of the class to evaluate our students' learning, right? If we're waiting until the very end to figure out if students are doing okay, then we've already missed the mark. I have a colleague, Karen Barroso, who likes to call it the physical versus the autopsy. When you're evaluating your formative assessments, that's your physical, that's your checkup. You can see what else needs to be done. Do we need some do we need a Band-Aid on something, right? What do I need to go back and revisit? What do I need to differentiate? But by the time you get to the summative assessment, this is already come and gone. We're at the autopsy phase. I could tell you what went wrong before based on the assessment data, but there's nothing I can do about it at this point, right? And so I know that's kind of morbid, but that's always stuck with me because it's an easy way to remember it. But yeah, so with our faculty learning communities, of course, we're going to look at that summative assessment data and planning for next year, like how did they do at the end of this year? But we're also during the year going to be looking at our formative assessment data to figure out where are we missing things. And so if you're in my earlier session, we talked about the book A New Way. And one of the things that they say in this book is that our goal, our overarching goal, should be for the next graduating class to do better than the previous graduating class. Because if we're improving, then our students are also improving, if that makes sense. So the faculty learning community looks at the assessment of assessment of learning as well as the assessment for learning. They're looking at both sets of data, but the main one you're spending the most time in is that formative assessment data, because that's, and looking at those assessments themselves, because that's where you can actually do real work in real time right now. Questions about that? No? Okay. So let's talk about a method in which that we use to look at assessments. So this is when we talk about the work of a faculty learning community, it's really around evaluating what we're doing, right? And that means that we have to be willing to share what it is that we're doing, sharing our lessons, sharing our assessments, bringing that information to the table, asking for peer review and feedback, asking for this information. That requires a certain level of vulnerability that requires a certain level of trust, right? And so that's why I keep saying you have to have that team building and trust building. So before we jump into what the assessment charrette is, I do want to show you something really quick. If you can't come to consensus on how to assess, or maybe you're looking for assessment ideas and you're like, this assessment just didn't work and I don't know what to do, don't worry, there's a website for that. Let me find my link and I'll share it with you and then I'll show it to you. So there's an assessment library by NOLOA, which is really cool. It's an awesome little tool. Where did my chat box just go? Did I stop sharing? I did. Sorry, guys. I looked for the chat and I accidentally stopped sharing. Okay, so there's the, oh, I don't want to only send that to one person. So this is the link I'm about to show you. Let me pull my window over here. Can everybody see my browser window? Sounds so cliche saying that now. Can you see my screen? Okay. So this is the NOLOA assessment library. That's the link I just put in there. You can come in here and you can look by discipline level. You can look by, and even if it's STEM related, things of that nature, and online courses, there's a lot of different disciplines you can look at. You can sort by degree level, or you can look at different types of proficiencies, right? So to look at ethical reasoning. And then there's different types of assessments that are all included. These are all various assessments for various types of things. It's one of the kind of those things you want to look through, dig in, play with, and figure out which one of these you need. Now, you may not need to use this if you already have an assessment that you and your team agrees works really well. But if you look at it and you're like, I don't think this is working that well, what do you think? And they're like, I agree, I don't think it's that great. Then you might want to dig into the assessment library and see if you can find something else. But I would suggest asking your teammates if they have something before you decide to dig elsewhere. But yeah, it'll tell you citation, where it's from, what's the background, and what the activities are. And then you can download the entire assignment and a rubric, right? So this is just a really cool tool if you're looking for different types of assessments to do for various content that's in there. And then there's also mechanisms in which if you have things you want to share, you can ask to have your lessons and assessments added too. So I did want to share that with all of you because I think it's a really cool tool. Any questions about the assessment library? Karen?
Yeah, this is Karen. I was curious how those were chosen. Was it in one of NILOA's type of summer institutes?
You know what? By the time I got involved with all of this, it already existed. So I'm not sure how they decided to start doing this. But when I first came upon it, I think it was like 2 years ago or so, they didn't have as many assessments. So I think they were still in the process of, peer reviewing and looking at the ones that were submitted, but it's been slowly growing. But I'm not sure what was the root cause for them to start developing this or how that came to be, but I'm really appreciative that it exists though. But
Yeah.
Good question.
Yeah, me too. Thanks.
Other questions? Okay, so let's continue with our charrettes here. So when we talk about assessment collaboration, the assessment charrette is a really great collaborative approach that's faculty driven and it's peer reviewed, right? And so it's basically just an opportunity for you and your team to come together and literally present what the planned assessment is, and then your team to evaluate it. So it takes time to do this. It's not something that, you can do it in a 1-hour meeting. It takes time, especially if you want to have multiple people on the team evaluating each other, which is something I suggest. One thing that I do not suggest is having one person be evaluated while everybody else just watches, and then that person just feels like they're the person that's on being judged by everyone else. If you have a larger team, then you can, cluster them up and have 3 or 4 people share theirs and so on and so forth. But if you're a smaller team, you want to you basically just don't want to put one person on the spot to feel like they're the only one who has to share their assessments and nobody else does. So it takes about half a day if you're doing it for a team. Speaking of faculty learning community teams, even if you have a large I was about to say that. Thank you. Even if you have a large population, say, for example, you have a department that has, say, 62 English teachers or whatever, right? You don't really want more than 10 people in one faculty learning community because everybody's voice can't be heard when you do that. And so you want to cluster them up. And so, for example, if you have 15 iterations of the same class and 15 different people teaching it, then I would split them up into 2 separate groups. But then I would also make sure those groups have a chance to come together to make sure there's alignment if they're all teaching the same thing, if that makes sense. But yeah, you definitely don't want the optimal number that they tell us is approximately 6. But I suggest not going over 10. Within 10, you can usually kind of work with and let everybody hear each other and give everybody a chance to speak and review their content, things like that. When you go higher than that, somebody gets left out, somebody isn't heard, and then you end up having difficulty and people not being motivated. Good question. Thank you. So it's usually going to take about half a day. You want to make sure you have space for discussions and breakup groups, and if the department is relatively large. So if you have a large department, then you want to split them up so that they're doing the charrette in small groups, right? You're welcome. And so when they're doing that in those small groups, it's not quite as nerve-wracking because I'm not having to present my lesson to the entire department, right? And it doesn't feel I don't feel like I have to defend myself in that way. So yeah, definitely try to keep them to a smaller group. Make sure that group has space to do this assessment charrette. You want to make sure that you have the readiness, buy-in, and support to do this. So you don't want to just invite the team to the meeting and say, hey guys, guess what we're doing today? We're doing assessment charrettes. Don't worry, I already pulled up your stuff. We're ready. You just have to show it. Nobody's going to respond well to that. Nobody likes being put on the spot that way. So instead, you want to make sure you let them know this is coming up, ask them if they're willing to do it, talk about what it is, make sure they understand this is not to say no, yes or no to your lesson. It's to say, how can we improve? And that's the leading question for everybody who does this, is how can this lesson be improved? And so if I'm showing my lesson, Alan's showing his lesson, Karen shows hers, Maribel shows hers, we're all showing our lessons, and we're all expected to give a evaluation and say, this is how that can be better, this is why I liked about it, or whatever. There's a little bit less of a negative feeling about it because we're all going through this together and we're all providing input to each other. But you also want to wait until you're at a point where your team is comfortable doing that. So if you don't have buy-in and you don't feel like your team is ready yet, don't go down this road, because they're not going to really become ready with their lessons and prepared to share. And if you have to show them their lesson and ask them to do it, then you know it didn't go well, right? So make sure you have that readiness and buy-in piece. Make sure you have support from administration to do this. You don't want to ask them to all show up to the meeting to do this half-day lesson charrette, but no one's getting paid. No worries, Rebecca, have a great one. So if no one's getting paid to be there, and the administrator doesn't even know what's going on, and you don't have access to the room that it's going to be happening in and all that great stuff, make sure you're communicating with leadership and that leadership is aware and that you have support, and let leadership know what specifically do you need. If you know you're going to be there for a half day, we need snacks, we need drinks, we need space, we need heater, air conditioning, whatever, but make sure you're vocalizing that and that everything's covered. You also want to make sure the invitations to participants, that you send participants the invitation and the shared agenda, and that they're aware of what's involved in planning this. And so I know if we're doing this, I'm the second one sharing my lesson. I'm going after Karen, and then after Karen is Brandon, and so on. And we know we're prepared and we know how much time we have. So I know how much time I have to present my lesson. I've seen the agenda. It's not an aha, gotcha moment. You know what I mean? So the first step is the participants bring the assessment to the group. Clearly, you bring your assessment. Again, you don't want it to be a situation where you, the SLO coordinator, are bringing the assessments to them so they can demonstrate to you how the assessment works. You want this to be driven by faculty, so ask them to bring the assessment with them and bring it and share it with the group. After that, each instructor shares their assessment with the guiding question, how can we improve this assignment? So the assignment author sets up the discussion by explaining what is the purpose of the assignment, the kind of feedback they would like, i.e. pacing, rigor, content mastery, etc. So I, as the instructor, am coming with my assessment and I'm saying, this is my assessment. We're focusing on computer programming and illustrations. And I would like to know whether or not I'm hitting the illustration piece enough, or if I'm asking them to demonstrate that, because I think I am, but I'm not. But I've had some students who didn't really understand the instructions and didn't do that well, or whatever. This is hypothetical. So I'm asking you specifically what I want you to give me feedback on. Understood? So the rest of the group is going to be like, I know you asked me to look at this, but what I found was that this part, no, we're giving them feedback on the specific thing that they asked them feedback on. Now, that's not to say you can't ask questions. There will be Q&A during the feedback and discussion. So if you have a question about something else that wasn't related to the thing they had feedback on, that's your opportunity to pose that. Now, the reason why we put that in a question form as opposed to coming and giving them feedback in a different way is because it's gentler, it's kinder, and people are more receptive to it. So if I'm asking you for feedback on, for example, say my rate of speech, if that was what I was asking right now, because I know I talk fast, and then you say, well, Sudie, your rate of speech was fine, but I really didn't like the way you moved your hands so much. This is totally hypothetical. Then I might feel like, I didn't even ask you about how much I move my hands, and why are you even concerned with my hands, right? Whereas if you came, if I were talking, and I'm using this theoretically like it's a communications class. Whereas if I were to say, okay, I would like feedback on my rate of speech, and then Kyle comes back and says, your rate of speech was fine, but do you think, but was there, why do you move your hands so much? Is there like, well, that sounds offensive too. That doesn't sound good either. But maybe it's just more of a question like, do you think there's something else you could have done to express instead of putting your hands up so much because you were blocking your face a little bit? And in that case, they'd be like, oh, you know what? I do need to be careful with bringing my hands down in this virtual environment, so I'm not blocking my face. So my point is, when you ask a question as opposed to just pointing out the thing that you saw, people are more receptive to being able to respond to your question as opposed to just commenting on a negative aspect that you identified that someone was not asking for feedback on. The next piece is written feedback is provided to the author. So the feedback the thing they asked you for feedback on, you're going to write down what your thought was on that. And a lot of times when I've sat on things like this, and I feel like the thing they asked for feedback on wasn't really that bad or like it was pretty good or whatever. And so and a lot of times those are the things that people are insecure about when it comes to their lessons. And so it is helpful if you think it's going well to say, I think you did a really great job on that, just so that they know that that's not something they need to focus on, right? As opposed to being like, your rate of speech was okay. Like that doesn't like that doesn't make me feel encouraged, right? And then the next thing you do is move on to the next instructor. So now my turn is done and we're going to go on to the next person. So maybe Maribel presents her lesson next, right? And then Maribel asks for feedback on a specific thing. We give Maribel feedback on that thing. We ask questions if we had some questions about some part of the assessment we didn't get or the assignment. We give Maribel the feedback and then we move on to the next person, and then Kirsten does the same, if that makes sense. So it's just a cycle of us giving an opportunity to provide feedback. I appreciate the presenter getting to guide the discussion, but what if there is something really problematic with the assignment, such as its clarity? That's where those questions come in. So you want to formulate your question in a way that it's not in a them off filter. For example, if there is a problem with it and it's not clear, then you could literally point to, okay, when I was looking at this part of the lesson, do you think that the students looking at this will fully understand what that means? Or is there a way that we can flesh that out to make it a little bit clearer? What do you think? And you know what I'm saying? Saying it in a way, asking it as a question to put it back to them, to let them decide whether or not they want to make that adjustment. And most likely when you put it that way and you point it out, then people look at it and be like, oh, you know, we could probably clarify that a little bit. And again, we're doing this after we've already team builded, we already have developed trust, and I'm understanding that by Karen asking me if we could put a little bit more clarity in the section, or if we need a little bit more clarity, it's coming from a positive place of helping me improve, not from a place of, gotcha, you did something wrong. Good question, Karen. Thank you. So then our next step is the group provides feedback to each instructor, and then the group helps each instructor determine how to improve. Okay, so after we've had our lessons, we've all done the whole thing, we then have a whole collection of feedback that we've all put together, and now we're going to help you determine how we can improve further. So we want to debrief what we've learned, and if we've noticed any trends, for example, like Karen just mentioned, clarity. If my lesson lacked a little bit of clarity and Karen's did too, and then Janie's did too, and then Emily's did too, oh, well, we need to focus as a team on being more clear in our assessment instructions. You know what I mean? Like if we're noticing specific trends. If we're not noticing specific trends, but we did identify action items, like Sudie's going to go back and add clarity to the instructions because it wasn't that clear. Karen's going to go back and do whatever Karen's feedback was, etc. We know what our action items are, and then when we come back to do this the next time, we have a little bit more. We're happier with it. Now, you may or may not want to come back and do the bring back the same lesson when you do your next assessment or lesson, charrette. But it depends on you. Like if someone assessed mine, and for example, if Karen said there was a lack of clarity, I might want to, for our next time we do this, I might want to bring that one back and get some feedback on and see if it seems more clear at this point. But if it wasn't that bad and only required a little minor tweak, then I'm going to go ahead and put that to the make my adjustments. I'm done with this one. So for the next round, I'm bringing a completely different assignment or assessment so that we can look at that together and I can get feedback on something else, right? So it might be like you only takes you that one meeting or that one assessment charrette to identify if this one was the one I wanted, and if it worked the way I wanted, but it might take more than one time. And part of the reason why you want to take that half day is because even if say if our team is a team of 4 or 5, it's not going to take us half a day to get through that if we're each taking our time to do this work. But what if I want to assess more than one lesson, right? So we can have multiple rounds of this if we want to go through more than just one lesson, right? But we don't want to have one person introducing a bunch of lessons at once. We want to go, one person does a lesson and go back and forth so everybody has equitable time to present and share. So that's that. So any questions about assessment charrettes before I show you the assessment charrette center?
Sudie, I'm kind of curious
Karen,
about this. I was just thinking in terms of having cross-disciplinary conversations, is it best to have disciplinary specific charrettes, or should you try to do these interdisciplinary ones instead? And maybe they'd be focused on even saying, we're all looking at assessing critical thinking, bring your critical thinking assignments in.
Can you tell I got excited about that question? That's a really good question. So you can do both. You can have job-alike teams where everybody teaches the same class and they're all looking at their assessments to say we're on the same page, we're all hitting the same outcomes. But if you're talking about, our whole department that doesn't even teach the same thing, but we all want to focus on like you said, critical thinking or whatever, yes, you can totally have mixed groups coming together to look at completely different types of assessments that are all hitting the same target, right? And so that you can totally do both. Like I said, I come from CT, and where I was teaching, I was the only tech teacher. I had medical teacher, accounting teachers, woodworking, auto mechanic, a bunch of other teachers that I had to work with in my learning community, but we didn't teach the same thing. So we were often doing exactly what Karen is talking about, which was looking at how each of us can serve our individual students. And we started out looking at reading comprehension and critical thinking, because those were the areas that we thought our students struggled with the most. Then we went and pulled the data to see if we were right, and we were. And then we decided to start looking at what standards and outcomes do we need to look at to make sure we're hitting those things, and then identifying if our assessments were doing that too. So it's exactly, for us, we had to do what you're talking about, Karen, because nobody taught the same thing. It is easier to do when you're all teaching the same thing and you're not just looking at a concept, but it actually does push the ball a little bit further when you are extending this beyond just the teachers who are teaching the exact same content. So yeah, you can totally do both. Thank you, Karen. Great question. Other questions? Nothing in the chat. Okay, so let me go into our, oh yeah, I do have it. The other resource I wanted to share, you already showed you one of them. Let me grab the other, which is the Assessment Charrette Center, which is really cool. I like it a lot. Let me pull that up, and everybody can see my browser now, not the slides, right? Yep. Okay. So this is where you can go to locate all the information about assessment charrettes. There's a whole toolkit and a packet. It's a lot of stuff you can learn about doing there. And it's really just really neat. And so when you go in here, there's the toolkit that shows you, you know, how to do assignment charrettes in a time of COVID-19. There's the thing that tells you how to make the case for assignment charrettes. If you want to go back to your team and say, you know, here's some data that tells us, and here's some research that says this is a good thing to have. Also resources for actually conducting the assessment charrette, and then also resources for student affairs assessment charrettes too, assignment charrettes, if you would like to do those. And then you can just download the zip file that has all of the handouts. So this is really great resources. Normally I am like the one who prints out and brings big old thick packets to pass out to everybody. If you were at any of my sessions last year, then you saw that. But because we're online, well, I have to just share the links with you. So if you want to just follow the links that I put in the chat, you can bookmark this for later and have that available. But this is a really great great tool and a great resource. There's also examples from specific organizations and institutions if you want to see how other people did that. To me, it's always helpful to see how someone else did something before I do it myself, just to see, what were the pitfalls, what went wrong, what went well, and how can I learn from this, right? And so there's a lot of really great ones on here from great colleges. Palo Alto College is on here in case anybody from Palo Alto is here. And then there's that was the last part. And then you have the additional resources here, which has all of the readings, curated resources, the research. If you're like me and you're a nerd that likes to read all the research behind why people do the things that they do, that is also on here too. If you want to go in there and do that and just understand the reasoning behind why we do this kind of work. So yeah, it's a really great tool. Both of these, whether we're talking about the assessment center here and going and looking for all of the various assessments and everything else, the assessment library, sorry, or the assignment charrette center, there's just a lot of great stuff. The NALOA website in and of itself is just a really great tool and a really great thing to, just when you have time, just go through and look at all the stuff on here. There's a lot of really great publications, resources, and things like that to help. But those two tools specifically are my favorites. So yeah, if you are thinking about doing the assignment charrettes with your team, then I would definitely dig in to do a little bit more reading and understand, what could go wrong. Look at some of the past examples of what people have done and see how that has worked out for them and what they ended up doing. There's some really, really good examples too on there. So before I move into my surprise, I got done faster than I wanted to. I must have been talking fast. Before I get to my surprise, does anybody have questions about what we've covered today? And if you're in one of my earlier sessions, you can ask questions about those too. They're all about faculty learning communities. Karen, hey. Nope. Okay.
I just wanted to make a
please be sure to
comment.
complete the evaluation.
Yeah, Sudie, I just want to make a comment. This was my third session with you today, and I just like the way that they all built on each other. So thank you very much. I got a lot out of all 3 sessions. So thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Yeah, I try to do that. That way it's not boring if you go to more than one of my sessions and you see the connections. Okay, so here's my surprise. So anybody who attended my sessions, we have 31 copies of the ebook, A New Way, this book right here, the one I keep holding up and talking about, the one I've written in and the one whose spine is now cracked. So if you would like a copy of this book, all you need to do, let me get my link, is go to this link, or you can scan the QR code that you see on your screen, fill out the form, and we will send it to you electronically. All I need is your name. Doesn't have to be your whole name. You can just put your nickname. I don't care what you put in that name field. Whatever you want to call yourself this week, put that in the form, your email address, and then just agree that you understand that Amazon will be receiving your email address so they can send you the book. And then you get the book completely free. I plan to send Yarek the email addresses tomorrow. He said he was planning to place the order on Saturday. I asked for 10 business days for this to be submitted, but I feel like he's going to get it done a lot quicker. So if you want a copy of the book, please fill out the form and then go ahead and let me know, and I will make sure you get a copy in your inbox of A New Way. This is a really, really great book. I think the thing I like most about this book is because a lot of people who are familiar with professional learning communities try to implement professional learning communities on college campuses using the exact same methodology, and it simply does not work. And that's because K-12 and colleges are not the same. And so this book is great for identifying where the differences and nuances are in terms of college campuses and implementing faculty learning communities. It's great for understanding what type of top-down and bottom-up leadership is needed for faculty learning communities to actually work. And it gives you some really great examples of things to avoid and really great things to do. And it asks some really tough questions. If you're in my first session, I was asking some of those questions like, how do you decide student scheduling? Is it based on student needs or is it based on faculty desire and wants, right? And most people were like, everybody in the call was honest. They're like, yeah, I think it's usually based on faculty, but that's not what we say we're student focused, right? And so sometimes we have to really think through and be honest with ourselves about, where the gaps are, where we have room for improvement, and then just start making those adjustments and making those changes and identifying those things. So yeah, I'm finishing a little early apparently, but that's what happens when you have smaller groups, and I'm okay with it. So yes, please fill out the form so you can get a copy of this book and read it if you're planning to start learning communities on your college campuses. It is very helpful, especially if you were ever in a PLC on K-12 and you really want to figure out what's different. Read the book if you have time. And then also be sure to complete the evaluation. Like Kirsten said, I don't want to get in trouble for you guys not doing the eval. All right, any questions, comments? We still have a few more minutes if anybody would like to chat or just has anything they want to, any other questions or concerns? You're welcome, Tony. Great job, Ileana.
Where are the evaluations?
She posted the link. It's the one that Kirsten posted right above the form.
Oh, God.
I'm gonna repost it right now.
Okay.
I didn't want to jump in, but I do want to make sure that I remind folks. I know we can stay and chat with Sudie, but we invite you to join us for the next steps panel at 2:45, and make sure you log in early. And then I'm going to put the link to the evaluation in the chat again.
Okay.
Thank you, Kirsten. And good to see you again too, Karen. I feel like we cross paths at least once a year, it seems.
SLO Symposium.
Every
last
time.
Year. Yep.
Good to see you.
Likewise.
Any other questions, comments, concerns about implementing faculty learning communities that you want to talk about? We still have 12 minutes.
This may be a little bit off topic, but I want to kind of pick your brain and anyone else who wants to weigh in. So one of the things I'm trying to work through is I'm trying to find a way to market this to faculty to get them to sign up. We pay them, we offer them stipends, both part-timers and full-timers. And so I feel like the compensation is there, but for some reason I'm having a hard time figuring out exactly how should we, I'm wondering if there's a specific way to frame it or to connect it, or if there's an it phrase or something that could get this to be more appealing to faculty, because evidently the stipend is not enough. So
yeah, well,
maybe
It sounds like you chose the wrong incentive. No, like, of course, paying people is good, but that might not necessarily be the incentive that they're looking for. So you kind of have to figure out what drives them. What is their incentive? Does anybody on the call, Carol, I saw you unmuted. Did you have a suggestion?
No. Sorry, I
So
I have a
when you're,
comment.
go ahead.
This is Maribel, and I'm an adjunct at Fresno City College. And I think one of the things that really motivates us adjuncts is if you make it inviting, that it's a collaboration with not just full time, but also part time. This is a team, because sometimes a lot of the some of the times you show up to a workshop and then you don't have the credentials to enter certain pages. So there you go. I'm just sitting there. So, then I leave. So I think providing a space that is from the very get-go, hey, this is a whole department, a whole section of us faculty. I think it's definitely something that most of us really look forward, because the first question is, are we invited? That's one of the things that many of my colleagues, my adjunct colleagues, we always say, are we invited? Are we allowed to participate, or should we wait for an invitation specifically to us? So yes, that would be my suggestion.
Yeah,
That's
and
really
so I totally agree with Maribel on that. That's absolutely accurate. And then I also think that to add on to that is to bring them to the table, and not just, and I don't mean just like by inviting them, but make sure they know that they're being brought to the table. Like, I want to hear from you. We want feedback from you. We need you to influence change. We need you because you're the ones who are doing the primary teaching. We need to understand what's happening in your classrooms, and we need you in order for us to get that understanding. Because there's a difference in just inviting someone as opposed to making them feel valued. And when you make them feel valued and you make them feel wanted, that's completely different. So like, just paying me, that's great. I like getting the money. But when you pay me and you tell me that you care about my opinion, you want my insights, and that I'm a brilliant person, of course I'm going to show up for your meeting. But yeah, you definitely want to do that. And you also take a look at the steps of transformational change. You want to make sure there's the education. You want to make sure there's the resources. You want to make sure that there's planning. You want to make sure that, all the pieces are there in order for you to adequately move this along. And so, marketing it is one thing, but it's also a matter of not just marketing it as, hey, we're having this whole new meeting thing that's fun, but hey, we care about what you have to say. David had a question, and I'll get to Kyle next. David said, do you know of any models of faculty learning communities between different institutions, but perhaps focused on identical or similar disciplines? One of the things that we talked about earlier today, one of my case studies, was actually about faculty learning communities that was like health, biology, like all kinds of different things. But their focus was on technology, and no, theirs wasn't the technology integration. It was, anyway. But they weren't like teams, but they were on the same campuses. However, there are a couple of different institutions within California I can think of that have district teams because they don't have Java-like people on the same campus. And so instead of doing what I did and just having everybody come together about general content, they instead grouped people from various districts so that people had somebody to communicate with. So you might have, if you have, say, for example, 8 different campuses in your district, you might have one teacher from every campus that teaches the same thing, and you can bring them together to have faculty learning communities. And then think about the fact that we do so much online now. We've seen that you can very easily actually have these things happen virtually and online. So you don't have to make people come physically together to bring them together. Good question, David. Did I answer that adequately? I hope so. Thank you. Okay, just saw that. Okay, Kyle was next, and then I'll get to Karen. Kyle, what was your question?
Hi, thanks. I was just wondering the role of students, their voice in the learning communities generally, or the charrettes in particular, if there's a way we can loop them into it.
So students are typically not part of the faculty learning community, but that's not to say that you don't extend collaboration into the classroom. And so one of the case studies I shared earlier today, they started with the faculty learning community, but they also created collaborative groups inside the classroom. And so a lot of the collaborative tools they were using, they also shared with their students. And so while they would have been doing like evaluation of assessments and lessons and stuff like that, their students were evaluating each other's work before they turned things in. And so they weren't necessarily feeding into what what was happening at the faculty learning community, but they were modeling that collaboration in the classroom. Now, if you do want to get student feedback, and it's not unheard of for faculty learning communities or professional learning communities for that matter, to have what they call small learning communities. Small learning communities are typically student learning communities in which they provide feedback to the faculty and staff. So you can do that as well. That's another option. It happens quite a lot in K-12 high schools, not as much in adult ed and colleges. And I think mostly just because of the way things are siloed in these, you know, in the older, in the further along post-secondary world. But it is something that can be done. And I would love to see that done and just hear about how that goes. I mean, I know it's worked pretty well on other types of campuses. So if you do that, Kyle, please tell me how that goes. I would love to hear about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then Karen also had a question. What's up, Karen?
Oh, not so much a question. I really liked Eliana's question because especially when you're leading SLO efforts on your campus, a lot of it's about trying to entice people.
Yeah.
And for them to see the relevance. I haven't solved it all, but a couple of ways that I think work is when there is a thematic related charrette, and that's why I posed that question earlier. So for instance, if the college is completely engaged in assessing one of the institutional learning outcomes, then you could find out which classes align with that outcome and reach out to the faculty who are teaching it and even say, hey, I saw your class, you're teaching the class, it connects with the ISLO, would you like to participate in the charrette? The other thing is that even if you have a form letter, but you change their name each time and you send it out, I think that has a really good impact too, because people don't know you're using a form letter.
Right.
And then also the fact that you are addressing them by name. And in particular, I like to reach out to adjunct faculty because they teach so many of our classes. I think your voice is really important. The whole reason why I'm reaching out to you is because I think you need to be part of the conversation. You need to shape the direction that our college is going in. And also, hey, if you're looking for a full-time position, this is a great way to build up your resume.
Thank you so much for sharing, Karen. So I was going to address Janie's question in chat, but I'll just go ahead and say it. She said, do you bring data on student outcomes or completion into the discussion of the assignments? So if you have the outcome data, you want to use that data just because it's more specific to the outcomes, right? But if you don't have that yet, then you can start with the completion and see where and try to identify where you're losing people. But it's better to focus on the outcomes and when you're talking about the assessments, unless you don't have that data, in which case then you would have to go with what you have and then identify what kind of data you need to get next. Good question. Any other questions? Alan, go ahead. If this is about the rager, I don't want to hear it.
I was thinking about asking you about the rager, but yeah, that joke is kind of one and done, I guess.
We'll know what it's about anyway.
But one of the things that I learned from listening to you talk is I've always thought of like faculty learning communities and things of that sort as being these kind of like long-term projects that you get involved in, where you take like a semester or a year, you know, with a group of people and you explore a question. And obviously they can be that, but I like the way that the charrette, for instance, is kind of a one-time deal. You could participate in that once and never do another one if you really thought it wasn't worthwhile. So it's a way to maybe bring in more faculty to kind of introduce them to this idea of peer review of your teaching without having to involve them in a major long-term project.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree. Yeah, it's a great way to kind of wheel them in to reel them in and see if they're interested, right? And then, yeah, when it comes to learning communities, it's an ongoing cyclical cycle that just keeps going and keeps happening, and we're always trying to improve. Whereas if we're talking about like a community of practice or just a research project, that might have one specific purpose and then end. But yeah, with this, with learning communities, the goal is for that to become embedded and to be part of our culture of collaboration. And so it just keeps going on. But yeah, I really like what you just said. It is an opportunity for people who just want to check it out and see if they want to be a part of it to come and be a part and check and view it and give feedback, right? I like that. Thank you, Alan. All right, we're at 2 minutes and we do want to make sure everybody has time for a bio break before we get into the next networking event. So have a great and beautiful rest of the day. I'll see you all for briefly the networking event before my next meeting. Thank you for all the wonderful questions and feedback. I enjoy meeting with all of you. If you have any questions, my email address is on the screen. I do not mind answering questions if you ask for anything. I'm also a PLC coach and don't mind coaching. If you want to share what you're doing, if you're doing anything with student feedback and stuff like that, please feel free to share that with me. I would love to hear about it. I oftentimes learn so much just from observing and hearing about what's happening on your campuses. And so please feel free to share as we move forward. Have a great rest of the day, everybody. I'll see you in the next event. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sudie.